Hello, thank you for watching this video on the Turning Point YouTube channel. Just to begin with, my name's Andy O'Donnell. I am a alcohol recovery worker within the alcohol target team here in Wakefield at Turning Point Spa and Recovery. This session is all around alcohol awareness, so it's not so much around advice or guidance. I'm not here to tell you what you should or shouldn't do with your drinking. It's more of information. It's being a bit more aware of sort of risks and harms and how we can maybe mitigate these. So Turning Point, if you're not aware, we are a leading social enterprise who provide health and social care services across England. We support people to improve their health and well-being, and we employ 4,500 people in over 300 locations across England. 93% of our services have been rated as good or outstanding by the CQC, the Care Quality Commission. Our latest annual review showed that Turning Point supported over 67,000 people with drug or alcohol issues over the year. In terms of the Wakefield service here, we have a long established relationship within the city. We've been delivering services here for over 35 years, and we work in partnership with multiple stakeholders, which underpins our approach to treatment and recovery. So we work with all kinds of external agencies, could be housing, could be social services, healthcare, mental health. Particularly within recovery, it's good to use as many different support structures as possible. And we do have some very, very good working relationships that do give us, great results with our clients. Okay. What we will cover in this session, it's just talk a bit more about alcohol. Okay. I think it's something that we all are aware of. I dare say the majority of us will have grown up around it, particularly within the UK. We definitely live in a society where alcohol is celebrated, promoted, and drinking is the norm. The question to ask ourselves is how much do we really know about it? What effects it can have on us, the impact on those around us, why we drink, and what problem drinking or drinking problem, how you might want to phrase that, what that really is. A good place to start is with a bit of myth busting. Some very common statements around alcohol. Some of these will be true, some of these will be false. I think just a bit of an explanation behind these can help. A common one is that a glass of red wine a night is good for you. You might see this reported in various media outlets, newspapers, who will sort of, big up the virtues of that. It's quite a open-ended question because what constitutes a glass of red wine? We're talking sort of a small glass. We're talking quite a large glass. I mean, a large glass of red wine is 250 ml. 3 of those is 1 bottle, and that's something to think about. So you might phrase it, is a third of a bottle of wine good for you? Might be the way to look at it. And it depends what angle you come from. I mean, if you had 1 glass of wine a night for 7 days a week, your sort of standard glass of wine is just under 2 units, 7 days a week, so that's around 14 units, which is thereabouts within the drinking guidelines. If you're drinking alongside that, is that a problem? I think it's all relative, so there's no hard and fast rule. It's got to be what's right for you. Sometimes that talks about the certain properties within red wine, resveratrol, which has been shown to be, quite a good sort of heart healthy supplement. Bits within a glass of alcohol, you can buy supplements of that particular nutrient, and are you getting the best effect with all the potential harms of alcohol? Are you getting the heart healthy benefits that are being promoted in certain quarters? So the question of, is a glass of red wine a night good for you? It depends about what is your relationship with alcohol. Is it problematic? Can you actually have that glass of red wine and it not cause any problems? It's a question to ask ourselves. Hair of the dog, more alcohol will help with a hangover. I can quite confidently say that will be false. The morning after let's say, particularly heavy drinking session, it's likely there will still be alcohol in your system. All you're doing in that is you are drinking more alcohol and you sort of perpetuating alcohol in the system. Okay, so you're keeping it in there, you're nullifying the hangover effects. Essentially, a hangover is a bit like a mini withdrawal from alcohol, and having the hair of the dog, it's a bit like a mini dependence, so it's keeping it going. So it will have an impact, but it certainly doesn't help. I can't have fun without alcohol, which I like to think the organisation's categorically shown is 100% false. I know from my own experience as a former dependent drinker, over 2.5 years sober, and it's fun can definitely be had in that. There is nothing to stop you dancing all night, going crazy and not having a drop to drink. It takes time, obviously. If all your fun activities have been sort of based around alcohol. It's going to take time to overcome that and build a new life, but that's, yeah, it's categorically false. You can 100% have fun without alcohol, as people like myself, our clients, our amazing peer mentors, they can all attest to this. Alcohol is legal, so it can't be harmful. Alcohol harms are, the impact shows, I mean, the annual death rates from alcohol are increasing, the hospital admissions are increasing as well. So it doesn't matter if something's legal or not. You may be a bit more protected. Other substances out there, they're not legal, so they're not sort of subject to certain safety checks that alcohol is, but it's an inescapable fact. Excessive alcohol consumption or problematic alcohol consumption is harmful for your health. So legal or not, it can still cause harm. Alcohol is a drug, pretty much. Yeah, it's a substance that has a certain effect on us. Sometimes there's a bit of stigma between alcohol and maybe non-opiate or opiate-based substances, and we might sort of give alcohol a bit more leeway. It still has those same impacts. For me, alcohol is one of the biggest gateway drugs out there because that can lead on to other substances. And alcohol is a mind-altering substance. I mean, people are intoxicated. You may or may not have seen that or experienced that yourself. It can still have that impact. So alcohol is, is most definitely a drug. Eating a big meal before you drink will keep you sober. Not especially true, because the alcohol will go into your bloodstream regardless. So whatever you're drinking, it will make its way there. Research shows that eating can maybe slow that, but the alcohol's still going to do its thing. So it won't keep you sober in that respect. You can't become an alcoholic by drinking only beer. Again, alcohol will do its thing. If you, look at percentage-wise, let's say standard lager between 4 to 5% ABV, wines approximately 13% thereabouts, spirits 40%. But if you drink 20 cans of standard strength lager a day, that will quickly create a dependence. So we don't use the term alcohol within service because it is quite a big barrier towards treatment. But let's say you can definitely become alcohol dependent through beer. It doesn't matter what can it comes in, what carton, how it's presented. Alcohol is alcohol, and enough of it will create a dependency. Everybody drinks. I think we all know that isn't true, but I think our expectations about who doesn't drink can be a bit skewed. So I think usually might immediately think of people who don't drink for religious reasons or medical reasons. Studies show that the 16-25-year-old cohort are some of the lowest drinkers in society. A third of them choose not to drink whatsoever. And people don't drink for different reasons. It doesn't have to be due to dependence or medical reasons. Some people, it just doesn't stick for them. Okay. If you use the phrase "everybody drinks" as well, that can create a bit of a bit of sort of shame. We cover sober shaming quite a bit in the service, and if you're using the phrase "everybody drinks," that sort of isolating feeling, making you feel left out, can that can be a bit of a barrier to seeking help as well. So we all know it's true that not everybody drinks, but then when we dig a bit deeper, what that phrase can do to isolate people can be quite harmful. Alcohol is a depressant, 100%. It will quite simply do two things. It's a physical depressant. It will depress your central nervous system. So if you see someone who's drunk, that's because their bodily functions are a bit they're not in control. Depressant, it will make you feel depressed. The instinct is to think about people who are sort of happy and drinking, and that is the effects of the blood alcohol level. So when you have your first drink, your blood alcohol level rises for 30 minutes, and then it plummets pretty much consistently for 2 hours after that. And enough exposure to it, the further your drinking goes on, the more you do, it will just have pretty much a major depressant effect. So that is a big one. There's a bit of a myth within that about people think that gin, for example, is the biggest depressant out there. They'll call it stuff like Mother's Ruin. There's no evidence for that. Again, alcohol is alcohol. It will depress you, regardless of what description it has. Alcohol-free drinks are rubbish. Again, my personal experience says this is very much incorrect. Maybe 20 years ago, the range wasn't that great, but go to nearest supermarket, there's usually a specific shelf in there, an absolute host, a variety of alcohol-free options, lagers, ciders, alcohol-free gins, alcohol-free wines, proseccos. It's all there. So that sentence might have been true a while ago, but it's certainly not the case nowadays. The quality and taste of them is very, very close, if not exactly similar to the actual alcohol-based version. Okay, so yeah, I don't think rubbish is the right word to use. I can save my units for the weekend. So again, we cover what the weekly recommended units are. It's never a recommendation that you save those units up and use them in one go, because that's binge drinking, which has its own sort of harms, putting your body under quite a lot of sudden pressure with a sudden intake of alcohol. The recommended weekly units, it's just that you spread those out throughout the week and have drink-free days as well. So saving units up for the weekend can still have quite a detrimental impact on your mental and physical well-being. People with alcohol problems only have themselves to blame, which is quite an interesting one. It's sometimes instinctive to think that. I think alcohol, out of all these substances out there, is quite unique, not because it's legal, because it's everywhere. To me, it's like there's constant signs everywhere saying drink, 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 drink. That society you're in. Look on the TV, walk into any shop, any sort of advertising board, and it's there all the time. And I think the minute that we have a problem, when it starts to cause disruption in our lives, it's suddenly down to us. Don't get me wrong, we have to be accountable for our actions. Like I said, I'm at the time of recording, I'm 2.5 years sober. I am responsible. I'm accountable for my own actions. But I think, given, like I say, particularly sort of British society, there's a fetishization of alcohol. I think we have to take that into account as well. So that can create barriers to treatment. So I would say that, for my money, is quite false, because I think there's bigger factors in play. Coffee sobers you up. Again, that's quite a myth, because the alcohol's in the system. The only thing that will sober you up is when the alcohol sort of leaves your body. Coffee, you're putting a stimulant into your body. Alcohol is both a stimulant and a depressant at the same time. So if you drink coffee, you might certainly feel more awake. It will certainly disrupt your sleep on top of the alcohol consumption, but it will not take away the effects of intoxication. A nightcap before bed will help me sleep better. Another sort of huge myth that is absolutely conclusively false. Any alcohol intake will cause very amounts of disruption to your sleep pattern. As humans, how we've evolved, we need that REM, the rapid eye movement sleep. We need proper restful night's sleep, depending on how old you are, anyway, sort of between 8 to 10 hours. We need that proper restful sleep, so our sort of body can heal, our mind can process the day. Alcohol disrupts that. So you might drink before bed, and you might sort of, sleep all the way through until the following morning. The sleep quality will generally be quite poor. You won't have that deep sleep, and you can sleep at the surface. If I explain that by you're not getting that proper deep sleep, so you are sort of potentially waking up during the night without realizing it. So the nightcap stuff is conclusively false. All my family drink, it's genetic, which is quite interesting. The research isn't quite there yet in terms of identifying, let's say, a specific gene in given the risk of inherited alcohol consumption. Environmentally, certainly, I go back to cultures, certain cultures, within the UK where, everyone drinks. It's every kind of event that you could want. So statistically, if you are a child of dependent drinkers, your risk of being a dependent drinker is increased against the rest of the population. So there is that to say. There's a genetic component there, but again, there's nothing specific in terms of our genes that can be pointed down yet. Only drinking heavily on the weekend is fine. It goes back to saving up units for the weekend. I mean, if you're keeping alcohol free Monday to Friday, if that's right for you, that's brilliant. But again, in that 2 days, maybe 3 days, including the Friday, if you're having a sudden huge intake of alcohol, that is causing quite a lot of short-term pressure on the body. Alcohol keeps me warm. The so-called beer jacket, I think that's some people call it. It will give you the sensation of feeling warm, but it doesn't keep you warm. You are still being exposed to the cold, so it sort of draws the the blood flow away from your core, so you are sort of still being susceptible to it. I compare it to if you wake up next morning after a particularly heavy night and you're covered in bruises, not quite sore, you can't remember what's happened. You obviously fell the night before, you'll just sort of be anaesthetized from the effects of that due to the alcohol. Alcohol helps with my anxiety. If I had to design a product that would worsen symptoms of depression, anxiety, I would design alcohol. It doesn't help. It gives you very, very, very short-term escape, distraction, whatever you want to call it, from feelings of anxiety, but the problems will still be there. You know, you can sort of drink to escape and black out, but wake up next morning, whatever's causing you to be anxious is still waiting for us. If you're struggling with anxiety around any kind of issue, then seeking more sort of cognitive support, mental health support is the best way to do it. But yeah, alcohol does not help in the slightest with anxiety. It's easy to spot an alcoholic, in air quotes. Usually tasks that you can set people is, say, someone imagine what an alcoholic looks like. They may imagine stuff like someone laid out in the park with a bottle of strong, let's say strong cider in the hands. But as I say, we avoid the term alcoholic because of its barriers. But alcohol dependency doesn't discriminate. It doesn't care who you are, what your culture is, what your creed is, sexuality, age, race, whatever it might be. On my case though, I've had people at street homeless, I've had a self-made millionaire, so it really doesn't care, who you are. The alcohol's the problem. It doesn't discriminate. Okay, so current UK alcohol guidelines, which you may or may not be aware of. So the government recommendations are that you are advised as adults not to drink more than 40 units a week. As I mentioned previously, that is through having drinks-free days and spreading drinks out throughout the week. So not save it all in one go as before. The calculation 40 units a week was based on the government calculating that 40 units a week gives you the same sort of risk as the low risk of being in a road traffic collision, for instance. So that's they came to that conclusion. The World Health Organization, interestingly, they have recently said that their recommendation of unit intake is 0. Okay, because there's no certain nutritional or medicinal benefits to alcohol. Just a few bits there. Yep. So 40 units. There really isn't any sort of concrete, complete safe level of drinking. But if you do stick within that guideline, the risks and harms will be lowered. Spread your drinking over 3 days or more. Like I say, if you drink as many as 40 units a week, there's a bit of a guide there when you're calculating units, which can be quite confusing sometimes. But as a general rule of thumb, you look at sort of standard wine, red, white, or rosé, small glass 1.6, standard 2.3, a large 3.3. Your sort of standard pint in the pub, 2.3, and so on. Feel free to pause the video and look at those in detail. But yeah, they're the sort of the rough, the current units. If you want to calculate the units in your particular drink, the best way to do that is to take the milliliter, so the volume, times that by the ABV, so the percentage of the alcohol, and then divide by 1,000. That will give you the unit measurement, which is quite a good guide to use. Okay, that's just a bit of an illustration. We actually use those props in our sessions sometimes. So it shows you they're not real drinks, so they can't be drunk by people. They are just props. But it shows you, so the blue part of that shows you which part of that is a unit. So the pint in the middle there. When you have that standard pint in the pub, the 1 unit is that amount that you will have consumed. An interesting one for alcohol and calories, particularly if you are sort of watching your weight or tracking your calories, let's say. Interesting example, so a standard glass of wine is equivalent to 3 Jaffa Cake biscuits. A pint of standard strength beer is a standard size Mars bar or 3 chocolate digestives, and a double measure of gin is the equivalent of 1 standard size Milky Bar. So for those of you who do track calories in all the apps or whatever you might use, we tend to forget alcohol when we're doing that because they do empty calories, I think is the phrase that's most often used. Any kind of alcoholic drink, it does lack most essential nutrients and vitamins, so there is no nutritional value in alcohol whatsoever. I do find it interesting that places like Slimming World, Weight Watchers, what have you, they will often recommend to their members that they switch from stuff like lager to spirits, for the lower calorie, which to me is quite horrifying, because I'm like, reduce the ABV rather than that. But it's something to bear in mind. So if you are, or if someone is looking to address their alcohol consumption with managing their weight, it's just a good thing to bear in mind with that. Generally speaking, the lower percentage alcoholic drinks, they do have a lower calorific content. So I know some of the lagers will have more or less half the calorific content from the full alcohol versions. So short-term effects on the body, alcohol effect in short and long term. The first one that's popped there is unplanned pregnancy, which can be a risk. I'm sure we've all heard stories of people in our lives, relatives who maybe didn't sort of plan that particular pregnancy, but were under the influence in a consensual act. Load inhibitions goes back to that. We may have all had it or seen people had that where we're a bit under the influence or just a bit more not as aware of societal boundaries or how we present ourselves. Reduced core body temperature. I said before, if you're out in a particular cold climate, you might feel like you're getting warm because of the drink, but your core body temperature is actually reducing. Your blood pressure will be raised, which is concerning at the best of times, but if you're prone to high blood pressure, it's something to be mindful of because it is that immediate impact on the body. You're introducing alcohol to your body, and therefore it's now working overtime to sort of process that and and take it through the body as it goes. Skin flushing. You may notice some people with long-term alcohol use will appear sort of red in the face, capillaries burst on the face. You can get the short-term skin flushing there as well. It can dull your perception, your vision. Again, it's not just people who are intoxicated, but enough to get you under the influence. It can affect your, your depth perception, how far you can see, how you can manage. So if you see someone staggering around after a few, their sort of their mobility can be affected by impaired vision as well. Vomiting, quite common, we'll probably see on your average sort of Friday or Saturday night out. In the towns and cities of the UK, people in an alleyway vomiting usually, that's your body's response to a toxin being put in. Alcohol is a toxin. It's derived from ethanol. A lot of the time, if you put in too much of it in, your body's vomiting it to save your life. It's a life-saving reflex that the body takes you through. Trouble concentrating. The more alcohol you consume, the more it sort of takes off the guardrails on your brain, I suppose. Okay, so focusing on things, it just sort of dulls your perceptions before, and focusing on tasks can be quite difficult. Obviously, with things like driving, which can be really, really hazardous, potentially fatal. Passing out. Again, an all too common one that we might have all experienced at some point. It kind of goes back to the sleep thing as well, where people drink because it helps them sleep. You can just knocking yourself out. It does have the anesthetic effects with that. Alcohol stimulates a certain chemical in your brain that induces sleep, so that will, sort of confuse things there, but it will make you just pass out. STIs, it's a risk, sort of goes back to the load inhibitions, unplanned pregnancy. If we're not taking the right choices within the whatever situation we're in, that can increase the risk of sexually transmitted infections. Loss of coordination goes back to the central nervous system being depressed by alcohol. Staggering, the struggling to function, the increased risk of falls because, again, the guardrails in your brain, okay, they've been eroded more or less by the alcohol, so you're struggling to do the things that we've evolved to do. Injury, like I said before, increased risk of falls, potentially maybe getting into violent situations. Alcohol has both short-term and long-term effects on the body. You see what's on the screen there. I'll not go through them in detail because a lot of them do cross over. When you consume alcohol, it takes away certain sort of safeguards in the brain. The frontal lobe, part of the brain that helps us evolve past our ape stage, and help us sort of be more human. We don't exactly regress to apes, when we're intoxicated, but then it can affect stuff like our critical judgment, our perception, our vision, how we sort of concentrate, how we coordinate. So if we're intoxicated, obviously, well, you might have seen people intoxicated, how they may sort of stagger, lose all sorts of semblance of control. As mentioned before, it will reduce your core body temperature, give you a false sense of being warm through alcohol. The vomiting, when people vomit, as you will usually see in most sort of towns and cities over the weekend, people usually vomiting down an alleyway can be quite a common one. That's the body's natural reaction to ejecting sort of poison from your body, because alcohol is a toxin. It derives from ethanol, so your body's doing what it needs to do to keep you safe and to keep you alive. When it affects our inhibitions, the stuff that behaviors we engage in, aggressive behaviors potentially, or we can be over friendly potentially if the inhibitions are lower sufficiently. Risk of unplanned pregnancy, STIs, which can happen because when judgment goes out of the window, if you're under the influence, and we sort of go back to our base instincts, that can be a risk. Passing out, as mentioned before, alcohol isn't a sleep aid, but will have that more anesthetic effect. So you're not getting quality sleep, you're just being knocked out basically. But they're the short-term ones that we can recover from quite quickly. Long-term effects, again, feel free to pause the video and look at the diagram on the right. I'll not go through it in detail. When we think about long-term alcohol harms, we usually think of stuff like liver, kidneys, that kind of thing. But quite literally from head to toe, it can affect us. It can put us at risk of sort of alcohol-induced dementias. It can affect our throat even. Inflame the esophagus, risk of heart disease, increased risk of certain cancers, pancreatitis, which is quite a big one. It can affect the mobility, it can cause muscle weakness, it can cause sort of pins and needles, numbness in the hands and feet if we're not getting nutrients that we need from alcohol. Medication-wise, if you're taking medication for anything, alcohol will slightly take the edge off that. It won't stop it working as it should, particularly things like antidepressants. It's quite a big cycle. We talked about the impacts of alcohol on mental health, and if you're taking, let's say, mental health medication, that's not working as well because you're drinking, the cycle continues. If you're mixing alcohol and certain medications, that can increase drowsiness, slowing your reaction time, which can cause other safety issues. The medications you're taking, on the other side of that, might sort of make certain impacts of alcohol. It might sort of exacerbate those and make it more sensitive to them. Certain medications, if you take them together, they can inflame the liver a bit more. They can damage it more. So if you have concerns, let's say if you or someone you know is drinking excessively on certain medication, it's always worth declaring it to the GP. Just make sure they are prescribing in a safe way. Like I said, alcohol and mental health are very, very intertwined, particularly because alcohol is a depressant, as mentioned before. It has psychoactive qualities. So like I say, for me, the alcohol is a mind-bending substance. We usually use that description for other drugs, but alcohol is one of the biggest because it just changes the way you think and feel. Those first couple of drinks, as mentioned, you get that slight buzz, that haze on, because the blood alcohol levels rise in 30 minutes, makes you feel good. After a certain period of time, particularly independent drinking, there's no more dopamine. You're not getting that dopamine hit anymore because you are in thrall. Your body's dependent on alcohol. And plus, the things that have taken over is stuff like confusion, clumsiness, nausea and dehydration, which exacerbates, those feelings of depression and anxiety. And it slows down our brain. Okay, so your decision making is impaired. We talked before about the lowering of inhibitions. The combination of things like dehydration, low blood sugar, and other byproducts of alcohol can leave us struggling to move or think, and that ties into these symptoms of general depression. And we become dopamine resistant, dopamine deficient if we get into habitual drinking, dependent drinking, whatever you want to call it. It's being described as UK's favourite coping mechanism, which is a phrase I don't like, but it's a phrase that's constantly used. Such as the phrase Dutch courage. It tells us a false story about what alcohol does. It tells us that alcohol's your friend, alcohol's going to help you sleep, make you feel better, make you more sociable. Those things are pretty much, going back to the myths, they don't do those things. They give us a very sort of temporary chemical reaction. Long-term problems, long-term impacts are still there. A lot of people, we talk about self-medicating as well. Alcohol does a lot of that. If you're struggling with depression, anxiety, whatever it may be, we use alcohol to medicate and to manage those. And like we said before, certain SSRIs, the likes of sertraline, fluoxetine, they don't work as well when we're drinking because the alcohol's not letting it do its thing that it needs to do. And it impacts our relationships, which is a huge one, particularly that we see in service. So it can impact our family health and well-being, the stress it might cause them, sort of physically or mentally, because it affects our mood and decision making. We're more likely to make impulsive decisions or instigate confrontations. I'm sure we, again, might have had that ourselves or sorts of other people, where we might store up resentments. We'll not speak about them until we've maybe had a drink, and then it all sort of comes out, and then that can spiral out of control. It can cause tension in the relationship. We worry about people, but also, we don't like what happens when someone might drink, or people don't like it when we drink in our behaviours. And it affects functioning as a family member, functioning as a partner, a parent, a child, whatever it may be. So it can stop us being who we need to be for the ones that we love. Financial worries, which is the big one. Alcohol certainly isn't a cheap hobby. It's quite expensive, particularly at dependent levels. We can get easily into the hundreds of pounds being spent monthly, which can impact on your essential living costs. And when we do drink, sometimes if we get defensive or if we don't want people to know, we can hide, we can be dishonest. We don't admit the true consumption, or, we hide it out of sight. I'm sure we've all been to the doctor at some point and vastly downplayed what we drink. But the bigger part of that is it can fracture relationships for not being totally open and honest, because generally people do care, they want to help, but there's a lot of shame, a lot of stigma around it, which can cause further barriers there. Within the alcohol relationships, we do want to cover alcohol and domestic abuse. Drinking and domestic abuse, like I said, very much intertwined. One can cause the other. Okay, they can lead into each other. The abuse can escalate if alcohol is involved. Another dynamic is sometimes people, let's say, who are dependently drinking and who need to drink to be well, they can't just stop because there's a big risk if they do. And there have been cases where a partner has been withholding or using the threat of withholding alcohol to coerce people into behaving a certain way. And then some people who are victims of domestic violence will use alcohol again to cope as self-medication. If these issues affect you or someone that you love, certain signposting we can sort of discuss. People like Refuge, Women's Aid, Men's Advice Line, Gallup and ADFAM. Resource for support of people who are struggling with domestic violence, or people might want support around, the support for both victims and perpetrators, okay, to sort of reduce the behaviours and work around that. So they're really good organisations to get involved with. Alcohol in the workplace. So roughly speaking, in the UK, around 1 in 5 of us say that we regularly drink above the recommended 40 units a week. And we have the perception to help us sort of relax and unwind after a busy, stressful day. I think for those of us who work, it can be incredibly busy and stressful, and we all definitely need a treat. We need to unwind and relax. Particular levels of consumption with alcohol, it can make things worse. It makes us feel sluggish. The knock-on effects with the poor sleep can then make us not operate 100% next day, which has knock-on effects for your work. So it can affect our performance. A lot of workplace cultures, particularly within the UK, encourage drinking through workplace events, socialising, networking, your Christmas dues, it's someone's birthday. It's the thing to drink. Some workplaces, if you suggest anything other than drinking, you get met with horror. That can be quite difficult to manage. So sometimes it's finding out what else is there. If the main activities are based around drinking, you want to involve in that can be pretty isolating. That can be, again, the feeling of isolation can potentially be its own sort of trigger in terms of alcohol consumption. Workplace stress in itself, is an enormous trigger for people to drink because sometimes the support isn't readily available that we need, but what is readily available is a bottle, is a can, and therein lies a problem sometimes. The lockdowns at time of recording 5 years ago, when we had the sort of, I can't remember now, 2 or 3 COVID lockdowns, hybrid working, home working became much more to the fore, and that increased people's consumption. So because there wasn't as much travel involved, and sometimes if you're combining work and home, that can increase the stress. The COVID lockdowns increased alcohol consumption anyway, okay, regardless of what your situation is, but particularly that dynamic of working from home, that was a particular trigger in some areas. Alcohol and driving is a huge one. The inescapable fact is drink driving kills. There's no dispute over that. It simply does. Any sort of alcoholic beverage will impair your judgment, your reaction times, your vision, your perception. It doesn't make it safe to drive at all. There's a drink driving limit. If you get breathalyzed, the sort of anything above 35 reading on that micrograms per breath would be an offence. The safe guidelines is you avoid it altogether, then you're best place to be, driving as safe as you can. And we're not just talking about being intoxicated, we're not talking about being drunk. It's a couple of pints, a glass of wine, that will still impact your reaction times and your judgment. And as we say, the advice from the police and everyone, the safest way to drive is to avoid alcohol whatsoever. Okay. Even if you had a big night out, if you've been drinking excessively the night before, there's a good chance the alcohol levels in your system will be quite high. So are you really safe to drive? There've been cases where people have been breathalyzed the morning after and they are still over the limit. So it's something to, to think about. Generally speaking, within substance use services, we have a responsibility to report concerns to the DVLA. So for instance, clients who engage in treatment and they disclose their drinking and driving, we have to report it. It keeps the public safe, it keeps the client safe, keeps everyone safe, and that's why we do it. The reasons people drink are sort of manifold. There are many reasons why people start that, from anything from trauma through to events, fun. It's all there. Typical examples would be people state wants to drink to cope with mental health, to escape feelings, boredom, routine, habit. Boredom's a huge one. A lot of people I speak to, rather than traumatic events or life stress, boredom is one of the biggest reasons out there. Some people use it to, we talked about self-medicating, some people use that to medicate against physical pains, numbness, they feel it can help. And when we talk about problem drinking, it is a problem for various reasons, and it's all relative. So it just depends on what was it for you. You might only drink once a month, okay? But if that is causing you to experience problems a few days after that, that's a drinking problem. You might be drinking every single day, you're physically dependent. Obviously, that's a problem. If you have one, that proverbial one glass of wine a night, that's causing you a problem in your life for whatever reason, that's a drinking problem. There's no sort of stigma or shame to it. Again, it depends on your particular circumstances. What doesn't help as well in terms of reason why people drink, the culture, christenings, engagements, weddings, funerals. There's now annual sort of football tournaments, international tournaments, for example. There's all kinds of sports activities that can, give us the atmosphere, the urge to drink. When the sun's out, again, as we record, it's a blistering hot day, which can be a bit of a trigger. People to go to a beer garden. When the weather's terrible, you want to stay inside and drink. There will always be a reason. There will always be something that can trigger us. Okay. Particularly around Christmas time, a lot of the adverts, are for alcohol. Okay, people are promoting that. You see these lovely large sort of spreads with all the various food, and there's usually plenty of bottles of of alcohol in there. And like I said before, we've talked about the myth that people only got themselves to blame. Again, we are accountable. We have to do that, but I think sometimes we are set up to fail given the society that we live in. The challenge is to look at how we sort of move beyond that and see what's our particular trigger. Because some people, weddings, funerals, they don't bother them. But the summer, having a stressful day at work, that can be more of a trigger than anything else. So it's good to figure out what makes us tick, what makes us drink. So just talk about alcohol dependence. As I say, we don't use the term alcoholic. I think we use that because firstly, that word is loaded with so much stigma. It puts the onus on the person rather than the substance. It's also a barrier to treatment. So some people won't seek help because they're not an alcoholic. Again, they're not drinking excessive amounts daily, even though their alcohol consumption is causing problems. So alcohol dependence, other phrases, alcohol use disorder, whatever you want to describe it as. But when we talk about alcohol dependence, is where your body is literally dependent on alcohol to function and to survive. If you or someone that you know, someone that you love, you feel that maybe alcohol dependent, they cannot stop drinking suddenly. Okay, that's the thing. Within reason, some substances out there, you can more or less stop taking, you could stop smoking straight away. You could stop smoking cigarettes. But alcohol, you cannot do that because then you're at risk of withdrawal symptoms, which leads into alcohol withdrawal syndrome, which can be fatal. So typical symptoms withdrawal, hand tremors, the shakes, sometimes that can affect the whole body, not just the hands. Sweating is a big one. Someone might wake up in the morning and they've drenched the bed with sweat. That can be a withdrawal symptom. Increased pulse rate. We talked about before about the blood pressure increasing. That can increase your pulse as well. Nausea and vomiting, because your body's kind of going to kind of shocks. It's not getting what it needs. Same for headaches. It can affect your appetite. Sometimes your appetite might not be that cracking anyway, but it can sort of reduce that even more. Mentally, withdrawals aren't just physical, can it cause depression, anxiety, irritability, restlessness, and insomnia. Okay, so few of these are, in and of themselves might not be alcohol related. Some people shake because they're anxious, but usually if they're combined and it's following a heavy period of drinking, that could well be alcohol withdrawal. It goes through stages. So if there is alcohol withdrawal, the milder symptoms usually start within 8 to 24 hours from the last alcoholic drink, because to be fair, most of it's still in your system. It gets more severe potentially after that, between 24 to 72 hours. So the severe symptoms, we can get into hallucinations where people can talk about seeing insects on the skin, or hallucinating various things. Severe withdrawal effects can be life-threatening, okay, particularly stuff like seizures. So again, it's not to be taken lightly. Sometimes we're keen for people we know all love to stop drinking, and the key is say stop drinking, but it can't be sudden. People are dependent because it can, and it has killed. So the general sort of safe reduction advice for a dependent drinker who wants to reduce their alcohol intake, it's stabilized. So, sometimes it can be a bit up and down in terms of consumption. Just try and keep it level as possible. And once it's level, to steadily reduce. So 10% of the intake every 3 days, okay, is the general rule of thumb. Sometimes that can be 1 unit. We would say seek guidance first, seek medical advice before making any reduction plan, be it through us, you speak to your GP, because it needs to be fit for you, because we've all got different medical histories, different conditions, so it needs to be what's right for you. Okay. Binge drinking. The NHS define a binge drink as 6 units for a woman and 8 units for a man. Roughly speaking, that is around 3 pints for a woman, 4 pints for a man. So that is the beginning of a binge drink. It's also drinking heavily over a short space of time. Drinking to get drunk is also known. So when we talked before about saving your weekly units up for 1 session, that's where binge drinking comes in. And people binge drink. Again, this is far from an exhaustive list, but they define it, due to stress, social awkwardness, wanting to be sociable, boredom, mood changes, low mood. Okay, that can be a big one. And like I say, sometimes we comfort ourselves because we've not drank Monday to Friday, but we are drinking quite heavily on Saturday to Sunday, which can be a justification. That can make it confusing. How much is too much? Like I say, you can say there's 5 days abstinence, not a drop of alcohol in the system. It might go a bit OTT, over the weekend. The thing about drinking as well, it creeps up. When you have your very first drink, maybe as a young person or whatever time of life you might have been at, it's, you can't immediately start to drink vast amounts. It's a slow build up over time, so it's, we can find when drinking more than we'd like. So it's just something to think, if you are having a drink on the weekend, nothing wrong with that. But is it binging? Is it causing you disruption and problems in your life? Sober shaming, which is making someone feel uncomfortable for not drinking. People may not know that's sober shaming. More often than not, to be fair, it can be unintentional, meant as a joke. But again, it can be quite harmful. It can make people feel isolated and ashamed. It can perpetuate that stigma of drinking. Okay, particularly again, UK society, drinking is normal, not drinking is not. Sometimes that's the message we send out. And sometimes when we say these things, when we sober shame, it's because we're trying to discomfort our own relationship with alcohol. The most common reaction I get when I tell someone that I'm sober and abstinent, they usually say, "Oh well, I don't drink that much." I'm not judging people, I never dream of doing that, but it's quite a common reaction. And people get a bit uncomfortable. It's the thing where if you tell someone that you'd stop smoking, like, yeah, good for you, that's brilliant. But sometimes if you say that you're not drinking, you might sort of get the reactions there on screen. Because it can be a little bit confusing, and that's sometimes part of the battle to sort of move past that. And it's difficult, don't get me wrong, being social settings, but it can be done. After a while, as an example, let's say if you've reduced or stopped drinking, the first few social gatherings might be a little bit awkward, a little bit fidgety, but then things will settle down. I do assure you of that. But examples of sober shaming, it's something we might use ourselves, that we don't intentionally do. Like I say, none of us want to make anyone feel bad generally. We don't want people to feel ashamed of making life choices. And we might say things as jest, but it's something to be mindful of, if someone is making that decision for themselves. Sober curiosity. So it's quite a new movement. It's developed over the last few years, and I find it's really interesting. I think it's quite good. So it makes you question your relationship with alcohol. So it's people who aren't stopping drinking altogether, but are just asking more questions. So it's just looking at, I don't want to stop drinking, but I just want to have a wee bit of time off, or just look and see how it makes me feel. There are quite a lot of very good online communities, free listed there. Again, not exhaustive. It's whatever works for you. There's lots of recovery-based organizations online, people like Smart Recovery. They do online sessions and face-to-face sessions. That can help. But the Sober Curious movement, it's been driven a lot by social media. So, you can find organizations like these on there. Generally, they're not there as recovery support, as medical support, but it's a nice place to have a bit of peer support, people you can share experiences with, and makes you feel less alone, if there has been problematic drinking. So with all of that, you can make little tweaks to your drinking, you can, adjust what you do, you can reduce. If you thought, let's say for yourself or someone that someone that you love, if you thought you might need a bit more specific support, a bit more sort of psychological or medical support, organizations like Turning Point, okay, if we're local to you, we can help for a number of ways. So we support people of various amounts of risk. Some people are very low risk, some people are very high risk. High-risk individuals will benefit from our staff being trained from the Blue Light Project through Alcohol Change UK. There can be a particular risk with high-risk people who aren't open to treatment or poor engaged. So there can be a bit more support there for people who it might be difficult to engage. And we don't make any stipulation what people want from service. Generally, there's three main routes. People either want to keep drinking as they are, don't want to make changes, but they just want a bit more awareness around harms and risks. Some people want to stop altogether. They just want to reduce, be a social drinker, moderated drinker. And some people want abstinence. It's entirely up to you. It's not for me to judge, my colleagues to judge. It's whatever's going to be right for you. And we will support you to address that, based on your particular goals. So it's structured treatment. Okay, so we keep it quite regular, quite robust. It involves a 7-week course of sessions, group workshops, which are very, very nice environments. I co-facilitate a group, and they're quite small groups. It's a very diverse mix of people in there, and it's peer support, which is key. I think sometimes if you're looking to address alcohol, given what I talked about before, the people on the street, they might not understand, but you come to one of our group sessions, there's like an immediate understanding, quite a lot of solidarity, and more people get it, as do people like myself and my colleagues. We understand. So something you say in those sessions, we understand. That's normal. It's not strange, and you're not alone. Medical wise, so we lead with sort of psychosocial interventions, motivational interviewing. We have clinical team in place, a phenomenal clinical team, I must say. We support detoxifications, medicated detoxes, both community, where you do it at home, or inpatient, whichever's right for you. We've got specialist alcohol healthcare assistants. We've got non-medical prescribers, substance use nurses. So like I said at the start, we have to look at as many ways of tackling this as possible. The psychosocial and the clinical, if needs be. Residential rehabs, so we can refer people as part of the pathway there as well. Because they can prove them viable to helping people meet their goals. If you come to service, or if someone comes into service, they are always allocated a specific recovery worker. So you get that one-to-one, that face-to-face support, which is really key. So we can see you, we can talk through what's going to work for you, find out what makes you tick, your own particular sort of triggers, cravings, and what you want from service. That support is there. We liaise quite a lot. The local hospital here, in Wakefield, is Pendyfields Hospital, and we have the substance care team who support people following hospital attendance, which may or may not be due to alcohol consumption. So if they detox someone, let's say in hospital, if they come out, we will support them whichever way that we need to. There's other bits as well that if people come to service, we can make referrals, we can signpost, but we do an awful lot, and we are exceptionally proud of what we do. If you or someone else would like our support, there are a couple of routes to do that. So the main phone there will take you through to our national call centre, and they will sort of do a quick assessment, sort of based on what the needs are. And it's not obviously sessions about alcohol, but they will cover any kind of substance, be it again alcohol, non-opiate based substances, or opiate based substances. You can call that number. You can refer online as well. You can self-refer if you would like support around your particular consumption. Follow that link and you can refer in. And professional referral. So if there's could be a social worker, GP, if you're not comfortable doing either of those, a professional can refer you in using that link below as well. Again, feel free to pause the video and sort of jot those down or type those in if needs be. Okay. That is pretty much the end of this session. So I appreciate the taking time to watch this. If you look on this page, there are several other videos which are really, really very interesting indeed. Covers different aspects of our service, talks about our peer mentors, because Turning Point isn't just about the substance use side of things. It's all manner of things that we engage in. So please do look at it. And any questions, then please feel free to get in touch with the service. But thank you, and enjoy the rest of your day.